Oh, God, that's kind of funny. All right, so Happy New Year. Hopefully everybody had a good 21 and going to have a better 22. I want to start off with a few shout outs. People that comment a lot and follow me on Instagram. And I will apologize now if I do not pronounce your name correctly. So here it goes. Farouk Hussein. Thank you. You comment a lot on my stories and posts. I hope what I'm putting out is helping, and I appreciate your support. Aaron Donnan, we both know that Die Hard is a Christmas movie, so thank you for the comments and following. Kyle, you know who you are. Good luck on your new adventures, although I'm sure you're not going to need luck. You're a smart dude. My buddy Jay, he's a fellow that I work with part-time. He gets to listen to my jabbering and rambling and picoscope brainwashing and all that stuff live and in person at least 3 days a week. So get well. Looking forward to your return. Chris Edwards. Nice conversation. If I'm going to move to Florida at any time, I will definitely be looking you up. To anyone who comments or subscribes, thank you. I'm going to try to do call outs and shout outs and all that stuff every week or whenever I put a video out. So stay tuned. 1000 amps. This is a 2009 Nissan Rogue. Had the click, 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 click type of a situation. So I took a pry bar to it out in the parking lot, got it running, brought it in the shop, decided I was going to hook the scope up and try to see what the scope was seeing. I did fix this vehicle. We put an OE starter on it. So I've got after captures along with before captures. Some interesting stuff went on here. As the title of the video said, 1000 amps. Well, I had the scale set up at 1000 and it clipped it right there. So I don't know, this thing might have pulled 1050. It didn't sound that good even when it was cranking over. But before we get into this capture too much, I want to first show a picture of where I was hooked up. And then I want to start with the good capture, which is the after capture. So I'll get to cracking on putting that up and we will go over it. This is the back of the starter. I wanted to really quick go over the setup. So my blue trace is going to be battery voltage coming in, which would be here. I'm actually hooked to the battery. My red trace that you'll see on the screen is here. So I'm actually catching the voltage as it gets transferred from here to here. The brown trace that we'll see is the amperage. And the green trace is, I have a ground on the block. I'm looking for a voltage drop because the starter grounds through the block. So basically we have voltage coming in, transfers across, down through this cable, into the brushes. If all works well, car should start, or at least the starter should spin the flywheel. Still may not start. The little guy coming in, that's your 12 volts. That provides your voltage to saturate the coil within the solenoid to pull it in. Pulls transfer bar in to connect these two, pushes the gear out to connect to the flywheel. That's going to be my setup for both captures. Promised, here's our capture of our good starter. First thing I like to do is just look at the overall feel of it. The total amperage on this thing was about 840. I don't judge or diagnose a good or bad starter with peak amperage. There's too many factors that can control that other than a bad starter. Anytime a starter cranks slow, it's going to pull more amperage. Weak batteries, bad connections, things like that. There's a lot of factors involved. I mean, could you imagine if you if you have your windshield wipers going and you grab one of the arms and kind of tug against it and pull against it, you're adding resistance. You're slowing the motor down. The amperage is going to go up. A lot of times in the wintertime, wipers are frozen. People turn them on, pops fuses. Standard electric motor stuff. Keys on right in this area. Our solenoid, our starter solenoid energizes. Contacts close. We run a bunch of amperage up, and that proves it right there. As the motor starts spinning, kind of get a relative compression check. Engine starts, and alternator picks up, and we're off to the races. A couple of things I really like to look at is I like to look at the battery state of charge, which will be my blue trace. So looks like we're starting off with a battery about 12.4 volts, which is good. My green trace here is a block ground. Looks like when we fired this dude up, we had about a half a volt of voltage drop on the ground side. That was at the block, and that is comparing it to battery negative. What I like to do in this case, instead of measuring the ground voltage drop each and every time, I like to take and use a math channel. So this would be battery voltage at the battery, and this is a block ground. So it's channel A and channel C. So I go up to my tools, get a math channel out, A minus C. It's basically going to tell me the exact same thing as if I sat here and did the math every time. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on A minus C. That'll be my battery voltage without the voltage drop on the negative side, which we've determined is good. And that's going to be the black trace. The red trace, now that is the other side. That is power going in. Once the solenoid closes, this is the side that transfers power to the actual brushes. We'll look at that in a second. This area right here is really what I'm going to focus on the next capture, but this is a Jim Dandy of a capture here. So this is where my coil saturates for my starter solenoid, and once it reaches saturation and it starts pulling, it took about 48 amps, so it's pulling back, taking that commutator or contact bar and closing the two contacts together, and I mean that dude closed very clean. I mean it should. It's a brand new starter. Sometimes you get a little bit of arcing in here, but man, that guy closed up really clean right there. I love to see that. So that's a point that I'll check, and we'll see what a bad one looks like here soon. And then once those contacts close, I like to see how much voltage is going across them. So I basically can do a voltage drop across the contacts with the way I've got this scope hooked up. So if I pull this down to peak here, now granted the scope sees everything, so little hairs and little EMFs, you're dealing with a lot of amperage, a lot of noise. So bear in mind that if you get little peaks like that, I mean, you're talking billionths of a second that happens. So you kind of got to overlook or use the filters. I do have this capture filtered. I do not have the amp trace filtered. So I had roughly, excuse me, 7.5 available amps or available volts at my battery during peak amperage. And let's see if we come across here. Drop that guy down a little bit. So disregarding that little hair right there, I mean, we're close right in here. It looks like 6.9, I'm gonna say 7 volts made it out of 7.5. Available. So what are we looking at with this measurement here? We're looking at under a half a volt drop in the contacts, and then as the motor starts spinning, and Of course, that voltage drop, you're up against 800 amps right there. So nothing's perfect. If you looked at this with a voltmeter, you would never see that. You would see about 9 volts here, and you'd see about 8.8 volts here, because I love my voltmeter, but they only sample about 4 times a second. I've got this thing set up on a sample every 1/1,000,000th of a second, so you're going to really see everything. So as the motor starts spinning faster, it's starting to use less amperage, so naturally my battery's going to start recovering, and the contact is going to start easing up a little bit. And then right in here, the contact opens. So then all that stored energy has to go somewhere, so it bleeds back off. Here's my bad capture. You can see the amperage jumped way up. I had this thing set on 1,000 amp scale, and it maxed out my scale and actually clipped it. Probably went over 1,050, maybe 1,100. Not sure. Really not the reason why I replaced the starter. It was an eye-opener. I mean, it is a 4-cylinder engine on a relatively warm day. No need for it to pull 1,000 amps. Like I said previously, there can be a lot of factors in why a starter pulls so many amps. I've ruled a lot of that out. In the parking lot, this dude just click, click, click. So I was able to get a pry bar up there and tap on it while somebody cranked it, got it in the shop. And I said, well, maybe it'd be cool to get a capture of a starter clicking. Well, it never clicked again. It started and started and started. It started like 10 times straight. It kind of wore the battery down a little bit. I know the starter has a problem. It didn't even sound good. So I hooked the scope up anyway, and this is the bad capture. And now here's my black trace. This is A minus C, like we went over on the good capture, taking out the voltage drop. My stated charge was 12.3. It kind of wore the battery down a little bit, so here we go. Everything in this area looks pretty good. Usually if you've got some brush problems or shorting, you'll see lots of dropouts in here. Once the starter started turning, other than it kind of dragging a little bit, I think it may have had some corrosion in it. Don't know. I didn't take it apart. It had a core charge on it. So I didn't get to dissect it, but you can see the relative compression check that it does, and then it cuts off, and then the alternator picks back up. But right in here, you guys remember when I zoomed in on the good, how clean that thing started? So we have key on. Here's where our solenoid built up, and look at this bunch of mess here. Actually, let me zoom on it a little bit different here. Let's go back to the beginning here. I mean, look at this chatter. The contacts aren't making solid contact. I've seen this before on starters that were good. They usually chatter a little bit, but this bad dude has really got some chattering. And what I found was really, really, really cool is if I drop a line at 0, so I'm going to set my amps at 0. So I've got some negative amperage here, and I've got some negative voltage here. When this voltage is high, my contact is closed. It should be sending current to the brushes, and you can see that as it closes, it sends current. As it opens, current stops. Well, this thing has built up about 400 amps right here. This contact could not hold. So I've built up a huge magnetic field in this starter. The contact opens, So this energy has to go somewhere, and it kind of is like an ignition coil. It's built up a lot of energy. It has got to go somewhere. So when a field collapses, the field goes back to the wiring, and the current or the electric wants to go back to the source being the battery. I believe the term is inductive reactance. And that right there is so cool, the way this thing drops negative. So let's put some cursors out here. Well, let's go right here. So I have about 9.1 available voltage going in. The contact loses contact. So that energy gets dispersed, and it runs it right back through the brush, back through the contact. I'm sure it arced. It arced back and then shot the voltage back into my battery. And it all plays out right here on the screen, and it's what fascinates me with the scope. So I had, what I say, I have 9.1 going in, and then I'm reversing polarity, negative 1441 going back to my battery. And you can see here, now remember, the black trace is the battery. I'm getting confused. You're getting excited, folks, getting excited. So my black trace here is the battery, and you can see my battery jumped up 14.17 volts, and it did it kind of gradually, because usually when inductors release their energy, it kind of bleeds off. It's not really instant. So all that energy that was stored when those contacts weren't making contact, it arced and pushed the voltage back to my battery. You can see it did it there, and it did it right here, but it's usually kind of gradual. Doesn't hurt anything. It happens really quick, but you wouldn't be able to see all this with a voltmeter. And this is the problem area with this particular starter. I didn't get the capture I wanted, but I knew the starter was bad, so I got this capture, and it is a perfect example of how a motor becomes an inductor. The other thing I wanted to look at, let me erase some of this stuff. So I'm transferring about 9 volts right around 0, right in here. Let's zoom that in a little bit. Right around 0 is when my contact comes off. It's either burnt, it's chattering. I'm not sure why it loses contact, but you can see right in here, this area right here, this is a spark. This is nothing more than an ignition coil. If we look at the time it took for that thing to break contact, we're going to go, let's pull out a couple of time rulers here. Let's try to pull out a couple of time rulers, and let's look at that to the time it hit 0. You know, so you're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of 9.8 microseconds. Well, I can tell you, during primary ignition analysis, a good break-off for a coil charging is anything under 15, it should spark. So this thing went from being charged at 400 amps to 0 in 9.8 microseconds. So I guarantee that is sparking. And then that current, reversed polarity, went back across, it sparked back across, and then through our battery cable, and then ultimately ended up back at our battery right there. Now that to me is just as cool as can be, and without a good scope you're never going to see that. I'm not saying that's why the battery was, the starter was bad. Simply banging on it, making it start, told me the starter was bad. But it's kind of neat seeing this stuff. I've seen it a bunch. Just want to do a little video. It's very simple starter diagnostics, but if you really dig in and dive into the meat of what's happening. It is just truly fascinating. Nerd out, I do. So that's what I wanted to bring to the table in this capture. I'd actually planned on doing a different capture or a different video today, but it's raining like crazy here on the East Coast, and I didn't really feel like being outside and all that crap, and the electronics definitely don't like it. So I brought you this little starter gig. Hope you sat through the whole thing. If you did, you're a trooper. If you did, you're a damn nerd, and I'm okay with that.